Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today in our Business Gateway series of webinars. Today, the opportunities and challenges of rural businesses in Scotland. I'm Danny Gallagher, the Business Gateway Manager in Highland, and today we're hoping to explore the key challenges, unique opportunities, and support available for rural businesses in Scotland. Our discussion today will cover all of that and more. And well done if you've managed to join us dead on 10 o'clock. We're going to give folk a few minutes to join us. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes by the time you click through, and then there's the short form to complete. So we'll also be recording the webinar, and it means that you can view it later on the website bgateway.com, and of course you can share it as you wish. So I'm hoping that you've got your browsers open and you're not going to be like me and use a different one this morning and then realize I was on the wrong one. So many at my time of life to deal with. So hopefully all will go well. So for this webinar, everyone has been placed on mute to avoid any background noises. And given the challenges of working at home for the past year and a half, if you're anything like me, it's usually animals, children, or the doorbell going with background noises, or a combination of everything all at once. So it can be difficult, but we do understand all the background noises and everything going on. So we've asked everyone who's registered if they want to submit questions beforehand. So we've got a number of questions, and we'll take those during the session as well as our kind of normal questions. And also, because it's a live webinar, there's an opportunity via the live chat facility to ask a question as we go along. So feel free, if there's a question that springs to mind during our discussions, if there are a number of questions and we don't get to them, then we will follow them up afterwards. But it's always a good thing to do, because sometimes during the discussion something will pop up that you hadn't thought of before, and an ideal opportunity when you've got these guys in the room. So it's 3 minutes past 10. We'll just give it a few seconds more, and I'm hoping that many of you have now joined us. So just a quick reminder again that it'll be recorded and it'll be on bgateway.com. So if you've joined today, thank you very much for joining us. So the overview for our live webinar today: Scotland is known for its unique typography. I knew I was going to stumble over that. And rural landscape, which has been difficult for businesses at times, providing both unique opportunities as well as challenges. So this webinar will explore what these look like as Scotland moves forward from the pandemic and as digital working practices become further integrated into business operating models. So it will be useful for us to try and explore some of the digital processes, especially in rural areas. So our panelists today, an esteemed panel list, includes David Richardson, who's the Development Manager for the Federation of Small Businesses for the Highlands and Islands, Jackie Brereton, who's the CEO of GrowBiz Scotland, and Francesca Wade of West Coast Alpacas. Thank you very much for joining us. So it might be a good idea if we just run round all of you and ask you a bit about your organisation and your input to it. So David Richardson of the Federation of Small Businesses, it's all yours.
Sorry, David, are you on mute, or is that just my sound?
No, I was doing a dress rehearsal on mute.
Oh, well done.
So the Federation of Small Businesses, founded in 1974 by a group of businesses who felt that nobody was looking after their interests. And we've since become the largest business organisation in the UK and the largest in every part of it. We're a not-for-profit run by members, for members who want to look after their small business interests. And there's three strands to our bow. We're a voice for small business. We do a lot of surveying, we do case studies, we present the small business case to politicians and policymakers. Secondly, we do a lot of networking because businesses want to get together. They want to network and exchange views and news and what have you, and forge links. We do a lot of that. And thirdly, because of our size, we offer some great benefits, including free legal advice, great insurance deals, and a whole raft of benefits, which you can find if you look at our FSB website. And that's a very important part of why businesses join us. So I cover the Highlands and Islands. We have members in every community that I've found that has businesses. We have members there, and our role is to give these people a voice and to help them achieve their ambitions.
Thank you, David. And Jackie from GrowBiz, welcome.
Thanks, Danny. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Brereton. I'm Chief Exec of GrowBiz Scotland. GrowBiz started back 15 years ago by a group of local people, actually in Perthshire, who wanted to see a more localised enterprise support service. So we've grown from there, and we now support rural enterprises pretty much anywhere in Scotland. We've got a particular project in Cairngorms area, Perthshire, down south of Scotland as well. So we do that through one-to-one support through our enterprise facilitation team, who are all self-employed themselves. They all have experience of running their own business, which helps in terms of empathy and just generally understanding the challenges that people have. But we also have a whole range of online learning sessions, peer support groups, and a women's enterprise networking meeting at least once a month. We also do general networking. So look forward to seeing a bit more about that as the session goes on. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. And finally, we've got Francesca Wade from West Coast Alpacas, and also it looks like a friend with you as well.
Yeah, we call Benny the mini packer, because he looks so much like an alpaca. So we run West Coast Alpacas in Inverclyde at Ardgowan Estate, and we actually offer alpaca trekking at weekends. We actually only opened in December last year, so it's been quite interesting to kind of adapt to the ever-changing restrictions. And it's also been, I think, like a lot of businesses that have started up, off the back of lockdown, it's gave us kind of a time in our lives to kind of pause and see what directions we wanted to go in. And I think being outdoors with animals seemed like a really good shout. So that's why we've set up there. And to be honest, we've really been surprised at how things have been going quite well for us. So
sounds good. Excellent. Well, okay, we're all involved in rural businesses, but what do we mean when we talk about rural businesses? David, this could be one for you.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's worth getting businesses in perspective. When people think business, in my experience, they tend to think automatically of larger businesses. But actually, 39%, 4 in 10 businesses in Scotland have 0 employees. 87% have fewer than 10 employees, and 97% have fewer than 50, or are small businesses. So very, very important to the economy. And 40 to 50% of Scotland's businesses are based in the home. So a rural business is a business that's in any community with fewer than 10,000 employees. 98% of Scotland is rural. It has 17% of the population, but 27% of the country's businesses. So it punches above its weight. And 70% of Scotland is remote rural, which means it's more than half an hour's drive from a population of 10,000 people. And that 70% only has 6% of the population. So if you take the Highlands and Islands enterprise area, which is 51% of Scotland, it's Argyll and Arran, north to Unston, Shetland. And that area only has 5 settlements with more than 10,000 people in them. For sure, it's Inverness, Elgin and Helensburgh. And the latest projections indicate that Nairn and Forres probably have more than 10,000 people. It might only be 3 towns. So really, you're talking a lot of Scotland is very much rural. And just one other thing, about a few years ago, we produced a report on entrepreneurial towns in Scotland. A town being any settlement with 1,000 or more people in it. And the most entrepreneurial town, Ullapool. Second most entrepreneurial, Newtonmore. Third most, Tarbert in Argyll. and so it goes on. Its remoter settlements tend to be more entrepreneurial. They have more self-employed people. Why? Because really, if you want to live there, you've got to have a little business. And in fact, you probably have several little businesses, because one business might not make you enough money to live off. So you have to survive there. You want to be there. That's the first really important point. Most people living in the countryside want to be there, and they have to find a means to be there, so they create businesses, entrepreneurial.
Yeah, so small and micro businesses are hugely important to Scotland's economy. And I know that Grovis started from that rural base, Jackie.
That's right, Danny, and it was very much in response to what local people at that time in this particular part of Perthshire were asking for. And I think that's become more and more evident over the years, that having a more place-based perspective, a place-based support mechanism is really important to people. We've seen that particularly obviously over the last 18 months, where people have been, I think, more, I think they've recognised the value of living in rural areas, and we've actually seen more people wanting to start a business as a result of that, because they can see the opportunities more clearly, just because of the way communities and businesses have had to operate. But I would echo what David's just said about the importance of self-employment and business to rural areas. We've seen an increase, for example, in young people who want to stay in rural areas, unlike perhaps before, when they almost automatically wanted to go to the city, go to higher education, etc. But a lot of young people now want to make their homes and their living in rural areas. There are challenges to that, of course, but one of the ways they can do that is to create their own job through their own business, and many of them have got great ideas to do that.
Francesca, you've obviously decided to live in a rural area, primarily, I guess, because of your business, but not too rural?
Yeah, I think when you think of Inverclyde, I would say it was semi-rural, and I think it's kind of bridging the gap between having a customer base and also having the space to keep alpacas. So for us, there's not many small holdings available around here, and it's quite hard to come by land to buy. So we lease our fields through a privately owned estate, and so that's a way of kind of setting up a rural type business in an area that is semi-rural. And actually, there's been the benefits of actually having quite a large customer base, because we aren't, out in the sticks, and people aren't going to get lost coming to us. But I would say that it's good for the area, because although Inverclyde does have quite a large population comparatively, there didn't seem to be that many visitor centres for the area in terms of touristic things to visit. So we kind of saw a space in the market, say, and I think that locally people are very proud to be living here. So the idea of having something that is set up on their doorstep, most of our visitors are local, and I know that obviously because of lockdown that could have something to do with it. I honestly think that also people around here are very loyal to local business, and they're very proud of their local businesses. So we expect to see, returning customers, and we have seen returning customers from the local area, because people appreciate that you are a small business trying to give something back to the local community.
Yeah, loyalty is clearly very important. I'm interested to know what you looked at when you were starting the business in terms of location. What did you think about? Was it digital? Was it the travel time to a city, or what kind of things did you look for immediately?
Well, we actually had moved to Inverclyde. We both worked at sea before moving here, so we actually lived somewhere very, very rural. And we made the decision to move shoreside because we wanted to start a family and also keep some animals. So we came initially for work, other than our business. And then we actually really missed, getting outside to the open spaces, and we found that we were living a suburban lifestyle that didn't really suit us. So our idea of starting something like West Coast Alpacas was really because we wanted to have something to kind of bridge that gap between living somewhere semi-rural and also having some kind of farming lifestyle, because we had no opportunities in this area to keep our own animals for the nature of where we lived. So we'd actually sold up a cottage in very rural Wales that had a bit of land with it to move up here back to Scotland. So when I was starting to do the research of what we could do in the area, one of the initial things that we looked at were, keeping chickens, because there was a huge egg shortage during lockdown. And I was thinking, actually, there's not anywhere that does organic eggs around this area. And then I was thinking, well, I want to keep the chickens free range. How can I do that safely if we don't live on site and I'm going to lease a field? And then I started coming across alpacas as sentry. So I started contacting breeders and speaking to them about setting up alpacas and getting them. And then it turned out that they were actually a lot easier to look after than chickens, and a lot less susceptible to predators in the area. So it seemed a lot more sensible to just go directly for alpacas as opposed to making eggs.
Wow, so this really is entrepreneurial, something that you had never done before. I mean, had you met an alpaca before, for example?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, my parents, they had 3 geriatric alpacas that mow their lawn. So we did have alpacas before, but it's not really something that I had really given much thought to. I'm more into horses. And then actually when my friends, the breeders, they actually offered quite a lot of advice about how, and I think there's a lot of growing interest in alpacas. So it seemed that there were quite a lot of business opportunities in terms of the fibre and also the having visitors come and having that kind of interaction with them as well.
There's certainly huge benefits of rural lifestyle. David, do you want to come in?
Sure. Just listening to what Francesca's saying there, I think to operate a business in the countryside, you have to think outside the box. People think of different ways of doing things, different things to do. And that is demonstrated beautifully in, there are a lot of business awards out there. We have our FSB Small Business Awards, and they take place right across the UK, and there are regional heats. For this purpose, Scotland and Wales regions. And what's interesting is that the Highlands and Islands, which is Northern and Western Isles and Highland Council area, have about 15% of Scotland's businesses. They produce over 40% of the winners of the Scottish heat. But then the winners of the Scottish heat go forward to the UK finals. The last 2 UK small businesses of the year have been based in the Highlands. Now, that's remarkable given we have about 0.04% or 0.4% of the UK's businesses. Why should 2 in succession of the top accolade be won by Highland businesses? And I think it's because businesses here are different. They're not necessarily better at all. They're just different. They think outside the box. They create different circumstances for themselves. They don't do it to make lots of money, because you don't live in the Highlands if you want to make money. You live here if you want a fantastic quality of life. You set up your business and you have to adapt to the circumstance which you find yourself. So I think that there's something very different about rural businesses. And Francesca and her alpaca tale and not going down the, we've got chickens, nightmare, going down the alpaca route is exactly the right, that's what so many people are doing. And it's so important that continues.
Jackie, would you agree with that?
Yes, totally. I was just thinking as David was talking there, and Francesca, I love that journey from chickens to alpacas. And just I don't know whether the Geronimo story at the moment is adding more interest to alpacas, Francesca, in a kind of sad way, sort of drawing attention. But yeah, I'd agree. We had a little word cloud. Well, we've still got a word cloud of some of the more unusual businesses that people have come to us with. Our favourite a couple of years ago was inflatable pubs. Somebody who was making a living, not just inflatable pubs, but you could actually hire an inflatable disco dome to go with it. And it's just people, again, thinking out of the box about what do people need in rural areas. And that idea that you could just hire something where you could have a pop-up party or celebration was brilliant. And, you know, I think if, you know, it's interesting. I think a lot of people's perception of rural is still, and I came across this a few days ago, it's still that it's dominated by agriculture and land-based businesses. Now, agriculture is very important, obviously, to Scotland as a whole and to rural Scotland, and there's a lot of businesses that are connected to agriculture, but I'm not sure that people appreciate, if they don't have a connection to rural, the sheer diversity of types of businesses and ideas. And I think that's been particularly in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, when with digital connectivity, there's actually very few businesses that you can't run from a rural setting. And I think that's made a huge difference, albeit there are still challenges in many areas of Scotland around connectivity. But I think it's to help people to understand that there's very few businesses you can't actually run successfully from a rural location.
Yeah, well, hold that thought, Jackie. You've just led me in nicely to, you know, we realise the benefits of setting up business locally and working locally, but what are the challenges that go with that? That's you, Jackie.
That's me. Challenges. Yeah.
You were the one that brought it up.
So there are challenges, obviously. There's challenges, let's face it, there's challenges setting up and growing a business anywhere. I think the additional challenges in rural areas are, some of them are obvious. Depending on where you are based in rural and island Scotland, access to services is obviously sometimes more difficult, whether that's local education, transport services that any family would need, whether they're running a business or not. I mentioned digital connectivity. That's becoming less of a challenge in many areas, but we've still got gaps, and some quite surprising gaps. I live in a part of Eastern Perthshire that's it's within 17-20 miles of two cities, and yet some of my neighbours and some of the neighbouring villages still don't have access to fast broadband, high-speed broadband. So, and that's, you know, it's quite amazing actually. In some parts of the Highlands, which I'm sure David will know, they have really super fast broadband, and often that's because the community has actually come together and made it possible. That's going to improve, obviously. There's a promise by government that we're all going to have access to super broadband, so that's going to cut down on some of the challenges. Access to markets is obviously a key challenge. Again, having digital access reduces that, because many businesses can reach their customers online, but others still need to have centres of population to sell to, so that is an issue. So you really have to think about that when you're thinking about the location of your business. Where are most of your customers going to be based? Can you diversify that customer base? And then I think there's also there's an infrastructure issue that still exists. So in some parts of rural Scotland, it's still more price effective in terms of property, so you can still buy property cheaper than you could in the bigger cities. But in other parts of rural Scotland, it's the opposite, and prices of property, particularly in the last year, have rocketed because of higher demand. So that is a challenge now. And if you do need premises to run your business, if you can't run it from home, we'll have to accept that there are fewer ready-made commercial premises in many parts of rural and island Scotland. So these are some of the challenges, but offset by that are many of the opportunities. And Francesca mentioned lifestyle. And I think for many people, that's really that's an important part of decision making. People value a lifestyle that's going to be conducive to good family life and good quality of life, access to natural resources, etc. And that's one of the great things about having a rural business.
Just thinking about rural businesses and location, Francesca, you mentioned about the availability of you know, what was around in a rural area that you could rent, for example, and someone has come on and said that they want to set up a business in a rural area, but they're finding real difficulty finding premises, whether it's via the local authority. And they're actually finding now, because of staycation, folk are buying up, just as you mentioned, Jackie, the buying up properties and the buying up locations, which would otherwise might be used as a business or something else. David, I know that there's other challenges as well that you have in the Highlands and Islands.
Sure. So, I mean, Jackie was a comprehensive list there, but added to that, seasonality issue is a big issue. So somebody can have a fantastic business, but it only operates for a few months. They've got to make enough money to carry through the winter. They probably won't. So the whole point about a croft was you had a number of different incomes. You know, you had 70% of your income in the croft, the rest was earned elsewhere. And that's the same with life up here. So many businesses have more than one strand of business. People have more than one strand to the bow because they need to have income from a number of sources. So profits can be low. Staffing is obviously a big issue now. It's a recent survey we conducted found that 40% of businesses didn't have enough staff. 45% didn't have enough staff to meet their needs. That's critical. Transportation costs, delivery costs, costs generally are higher. And then there's also another aspect to running a business in small communities, remote communities, which is that everyone knows your business and everyone is an expert in your business, have a view in your business. You can't hide. You can be much more anonymous in a city. That's one of the bizarre things. When people are escaping the law, they run to the Highlands, and nothing is more visible than somebody escaping the law in the Highlands. And the other thing is that incomers must fit into rural communities as well. It's not the other way around. And we conducted a big survey of island-based businesses in 2017 for the Island Bill that went through Scottish Parliament. And I was reading through all the comments the other day for another purpose, and quite a few people said it's very hard to run a business, you have to fit in. And you've got to fit in with the local scene as well. You can't come in there and be, I'm the big I am from outside and I'm going to show you little local folk how to run a business. You've got to fit in with the local scene. It's important that, I think, it's in remoter communities.
David, your stats are very popular on the online chat just now. So there's a number of folk are asking, have you got a link to your entrepreneurial survey? Someone else is asking if you can post the stats at a later date. So there's a lot of folk that are keen on that. Francesca, I was going to ask, just when you started up the business, what support did you get? Public support?
Yeah, so we got a lot of support from Business Gateway. We had an advisor who told us advice on how to, promote ourselves, setting ourselves up in a very practical basis, and then also directed us to webinars for things like bookkeeping, which we hadn't done before, and also things like grants as well that might be available to us. There was also things like kind of sessions and webinars on how to promote yourself digitally. To be honest, I also am a semi-professional musician, so I have quite a lot of experience doing that myself, like promoting a business. But in terms of dealing with how much income you're actually making in terms of cash books and making sure that you're declaring everything. Well, as a musician, I've never made enough money to really declare anything like that. So it was quite novel, that side of things.
There's still time.
Yeah, I also wanted to go back to the challenges faced for businesses. And I think that setting up in a rural place, like David said, you do need to have various projects on the go to make a living. And I think that for us to set up in a semi-rural place meant that we could keep our full-time jobs. And at the beginning, test the water to see how the business goes, how it evolves, especially in a changing climate at the moment with COVID. And I think our eventual plan was to, go out to somewhere very, very rural and stay in a kind of croft and see if we could make enough money from things like alpacas and various businesses. So this was kind of like a stepping stone whilst also having access to places like good hospitals for, especially when you've got young kids, you've got to think of these things. It's not just yourself that you're thinking of. So that was kind of our way of kind of testing out and experiencing firsthand what the challenges are, so that we could have experience to then prepare ourselves for when we go very, very isolated, which is definitely our dream. I would say that when we Googled Inverclyde, we saw a lot of green on the map, and so we thought that there would be, a lot of crafts available. And I think the places that we saw for sale were over in Dunoon, not expecting that the ferry wasn't actually that reliable to get to work. So when we actually did get here and realised that we'd have to stay on the side that our office was in, we realised that there was actually a lot less scope for finding something that was with a bit of our own land. So again, another challenge is to finding land, whether that be because you're semi-rural and there isn't that much land available, or if it's because you are rural but you have to have lived there for a while and you have to know the farmers to be able to approach them. And trying to get people to sell you land is very difficult in the UK. So I think if you live there for a couple of years and you get to know the locals and you fit in, like David said, then there's more chance for you to have success in a rural business if it's relying on accessing land or routes that might be privately owned. So, I mean, we lived here for about a year and a half before knowing who owned what fields and what was available around here, and we wouldn't have been able to just move to the area and dive straight in. We really did have to set up connections first to find out, who to approach to ask for help. I think also a practical basis, what we find like challenges for a rural business, especially if you're keeping things like livestock or equipment that isn't necessarily on your own land, is security. And that's something that we've really had to give quite a lot of thought to, and which has brought us to Ardgowan Estate, because obviously there's someone living in the big house all year round, and also there's a livery yard next to it as well. So there's various houses around the field where alpacas are kept. So it's quite difficult to get to our field unnoticed. You have to drive past several houses, and people are on the lookout for, any unexpected behaviour and unexpected visits. Also access to vets that know about alpacas as well. So our nearest vet is in Greenock, but then we opted to go for a vet that has more experience with alpacas. So actually they travel about, I think it's 40 minutes drive, which obviously has costs involved. So that's also something that you really have to think about, is how you're going to access veterinary help if necessary. And also for your own sickness, when you're setting up a rural business, who are you going to get to cover your jobs if you're sick? You've really got to have a network and be really part of the community to know that you can ask for favours, and also be prepared to give favours back to help people out, because it really is just you, and you're relying on yourself to look after your own business and your friends in a small community.
That's a fantastic insight, almost from start to where you are now running your business. I have to say that I am heartened that you mentioned bookkeeping, because at Business Gateway, we tend to go, with, yes, this is great to be an entrepreneur, do this, do that, do the next thing. Remember and register with HMRC. Remember that you need to do your own books. And it's the non-sexy things that when we say that to people, we can see their face falling almost because they're so excited about starting up their business, but there are the nuts and bolts of it too. But I think once you get your head around it, Francesca, it's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Business Gateway, the webinar I went to, I've gone to several now, they give you templates and everything, so it really breaks it down. It's almost like an idiot's guide, and I think that was actually very reassuring, because I mean, it's great. I don't need that much help with the creative ideas of the business. You know, between me and my husband, we can come up with all sorts to kind of overcome obstacles on a practical sense. But when it comes to things like bookkeeping, well, that takes a bit of expertise and know-how. And I think you really do need a bit of training from someone that knows what they're talking about. So the webinar that we've attended, it's just been very, very helpful.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So just talking about creativity, Jackie, in terms of digital connectivity and the digital rollout to rural areas, that must be a huge boon to lots of rural businesses.
It is, Danny, huge for all sorts of sectors as well. So we support a lot of businesses in the creative services, and for people who are artists and makers, for example, many based in rural and island areas, having access to digital to be able to sell their products is a huge thing. But we also have a lot of people who are designers using digital, so digital designers. We even have people who design theatre sets remotely using digital. It's amazing what people are using digital for. And we had a speaker at an event not so long ago, a young man who set up a business in the Cairngorms area, but he used to be one of the technical managers for Cirque du Soleil, going all over the world, making sure that the Cirque du Soleil shows happened. And sadly, when the pandemic started and there's lockdown, Cirque du Soleil was no longer. So he adapted his skills and he set up an application design business. And one of his applications is actually the test and trace that a lot of the businesses in Scotland use. A lot of the chambers helped him to access that market. So it just shows that using digital and being creative and imaginative, you can grow lots of different businesses from a rural perspective. And selling, then you can sell anywhere in the world when you think about it. One of the things that we've done with our creative services businesses in Perth and Kinross is to have a curated portal called Perthshire Artisans. And with the latest batch of artisans coming on board, we've now got 36 artists, makers, designers, right across all the different creative design areas. And that's not just a route for selling, because it's e-commerce. It also provides them with a lot of peer support and a sense of value of what they're doing, and they can share their stories, and hopefully it's inspiration for other makers and artists as well. And I think that's where digital comes into its own. You can create a community online as well as real communities, which are important as well.
Excellent. Don't forget that you can post a question on the live chat. We'll take a couple of those just now before we go on to the questions that we already have. Yeah, the property issue in rural areas, there's a few folk saying much the same, that they can't get facilities or premises. So we're going to post a website that gives all the commercial property in Scotland. So we'll do that as part of this webinar. And also, David, someone has asked if you could expand on the staffing problems and perhaps possible solutions.
Sure. So staffing problems, we surveyed tourism and hospitality businesses across the HIE, or Highland Islands Enterprise area. That's from Mullach and Tyre and Arran to Unst, including Murray and all that area, back at the very end of May, beginning of June. And as I say, 45% of employers didn't have enough staff to meet their needs. Now, that is not a new thing. In 2016, August, I surveyed businesses in Skye and Loch Awe, and a third of businesses didn't have enough staff to meet their needs. In 2017, that island-based businesses survey I talked about, 37% of businesses in islands didn't have enough staff to meet their needs. Now, that was pre-Brexit and pre-pandemic and pre-everything else. There's a long-term structural problem, which is basically demographic decline. We've got an aging population, a declining population, and we've got the lure of bright lights elsewhere, and we don't have enough staff locally to meet needs. Now, obviously, the pandemic and Brexit have exacerbated the problem. in a survey we conducted, again, 4 years ago, something like that, 41% of Highland employers had at least one person in the EU in their books. Scotland was 25 versus 41 in the Highlands. So there's dependency on importing staff. So it is difficult. Now, of the staff, the 45% that didn't have enough staff to meet their needs, a half was struggling on as best they could. The other half had either cut hours or services or both. And of course, the result of that, whatever you do, whether you're struggling or you're cutting, is that the customer doesn't get such a good experience. And the whole thing here is we have world-class scenery, we have got world-class activities, world-class natural and cultural heritage. That means nothing if you want to be a world-class destination unless you have world-class businesses to go with it. And it doesn't mean to say that they're all Skibo Castle type businesses. Whatever level you're pitched at, you should be giving out superb value for money. But you can't do that if you don't have the staff. So you've got TripAdvisor, bad reviews on TripAdvisor. Businesses say it's so unfair. We can't get the staff to provide the service. And then the propensity of people to return and to recommend to others is damaged. It's a real problem. And at the moment, there's no obvious solution because 40% of people have put up wages and wages have to go up. But if wages go up, costs go up. And if costs go up, the cost is passed on to the consumer. We're talking Highlands Islands here. It's already a very expensive destination. It's going to become more expensive still. And then you've got the housing problem, the accommodation problem. It's not just about housing. People talk about affordable homes. And of course it is if you're year round. But all these businesses are seasonal and they employ itinerant, seasonal staff. It's quality accommodation, safe, warm, comfortable accommodation that's close enough to the workplace. And so it's how do you overcome that one? And one answer is you have a hostel type arrangement where different businesses share the same accommodation. And then, so that's a whole issue in itself. And, I know Highland Council's got the money to build affordable homes on the West Coast. They can't find contractors prepared to build there because it's not economic for the contractors to build there. And then another element is skilled staff. So of course you've got to skill up your staff. But we know from various HIE, Highlands Enterprise surveys, I think Jackie referred to this earlier, that more and more local people, young people, would like to stay on in the Highlands and Islands if A, there were jobs there that they wanted to do, and B, they had access to digital and all the other things that they get elsewhere. And of course, digital is rolling out now quite quickly, or slowed recently, but it is rolling out. And the jobs are there, but they tend to be tourism and hospitality jobs and other things. And the trouble is that people have realized during lockdown that, to work in a kitchen isn't necessarily what they want to do. High pressure, long hours. They would rather do things that don't require that sort of commitment. And so there's a whole jumble out there, and it's not easy to see a solution unless we start reproducing ourselves faster. We get more young people, more children, and we have to pay higher wages, which means that the consumer has to pay higher prices.
Well, we may have a child boom soon after a year of lockdown. Who knows? Jackie, someone has asked us to ask you about ScotGov's recovery and council's thinking for rural. Does that make sense to you?
I'm guessing that this is about the Scottish Government's various strategies for recovery. So yeah, I'd like to mention a couple of things that are going on at the moment. So I'm on I think called the Advisory Council for Economic Transformation that the government set up, which has got the aim to have a new 10-year strategy. And my task is to make sure that the rural economy is featured strongly in that new strategy. It's a big opportunity because the government doesn't normally think that far ahead for 10 years. So we have to be far-thinking, creative, and we need to be really cognizant of the opportunities that we could get in there for rural. So I'll pass on the link to that because there's a chance to input, even if it's just a few paragraphs of ideas, to the group in the Scottish Government that are organising that. In parallel, there's also a COVID recovery strategy being developed. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, is responsible for coordinating all of that. So there are opportunities at the moment for people to feed in to those sort of processes. And I'd really encourage people to do that because what often happens is that the government puts groups of people together or they start down a strategic route and they don't have a rural voice, or there's not enough people saying, well, hold on a minute, rural is really critical to all of this. So I think the more rural voices we have influencing those mainstream strategies, the better.
Excellent. Francesca, you mentioned grants earlier on, and we've got a question here from John, who says there's often opportunities for grants for rural businesses. However, if you don't have a great way with words to complete the applications, you stand little chance of success. I'm just wondering, did you apply for grants, and what support did you get?
Yeah, so through Business Gateway, we were actually given a business advisor, and I would say that they really kept us right. So I think you just need to open the door to having a conversation with your business advisor, who will keep you right. And if you are having any difficulties, you know, have an open discussion with them, and they'll really guide you through the process, because the application process, they do want you to jump through hoops to get. There are grants available, but they do want you to fill out everything in a correct format, and they're expecting it in a certain way, but the business advisor really has experience of that. So I think I wouldn't be put off. There is support there if you get assigned a business advisor and start the conversation. They will try to ensure that you have a very strong application to make your best chances of getting a grant.
That's good to know. I just wonder, in the dealings that I've had with our businesses filling out grant applications, I just wondered, David, if you think exactly the same, that perhaps the application forms need to be simplified rather than, you know, trying to, as Francesca says, jump through hoops.
Absolutely. There's two elements to this. One is simplifying the range of support out there so that businesses know where to go to see the support, because you know, it can be too confusing, too many organizations with their offers. It's got far better than it used to be, but we've always said, you know, Business Gateway is a one-stop shop. You go to Business Gateway and they tell you what is available. But secondly, whether you're applying for a support in this way, whether you're applying for a business award, whatever you're trying to apply for, a job, the form must be simple so you can present yourself in the right way. And too often it's confusing, it's complicated. That just puts people off. You want to ensure that businesses with great ideas can get their ideas over simply and easily. And what you don't want are people ruled out because of some technicality. You know, I was hearing the other day of one of my brothers got a friend who's a very senior fund manager, and he's in his late 50s, and he'd applied for a job, he hadn't even got an interview. And when he went to find out why, it's because the criteria they'd given some office junior to sift through the forms. The criteria said you must have at least a 2-1 at university. Well, this guy hadn't bothered himself, had got a 2-2. So he was ruled in his late 50s, but he was ruled out, not because of his track record as a working man, but because of something he'd done when he was in, 19, 20, 21 years old. So it must be simple. It must be judged fairly.
So someone's just asking about the number of organizations involved in business support. And it says there are many good support methods for businesses that put out communications about what service they offer. It becomes confusing sometimes. Who do we go to for support? So I kind of think you've covered that, but we should also mention Find Business Support, which is the Scottish Government's go-to tool for anything business related. Jackie, maybe I could just bring you in there as well. Would that be fair that you use Find Business Support as well?
Yes, we're listed on Find Business Support as well. I really empathise with that question, because if you put yourselves in the shoes of people who are trying to start a business or get advice for growing a business, and you go online, you just put a few search terms in it does seem confusing. But Business Gateway is a good place to start. In most areas, they would also refer people to other relevant organisations, and Find Business Support is a good way of being able to find geographically and subject-wise what advice you're looking for. And I would hope that whichever organisation people contact first, that they would then act as the signposting and referral. If they can't help them themselves, that they'll pass people on, because Otherwise, you're not doing them a service, and that's certainly what we aim to do.
How did you find that, Francesca? Was it a minefield initially, or was it relatively straightforward in terms of the business support?
To be honest, I literally just went directly to Business Gateway. So that was the first thing that came up when I looked at support in Inverclyde, and I just had a very good relationship with our business advisor, so they just saw us through from start to finish. And if I have any questions now, we still have the support.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't include rural areas as well. Of course, the whole of Scotland is served by the service. I think probably what we are conscious of is that we're delighted that so many organisations are there to offer support. I think as long as we can chart the journey of the business and understand where they're going and what other support might be available at different times, during their lifespan. As the business grows, it can grow in different directions, and there's different challenges along the way. And we find that, in startup businesses, the challenges, a year or 18 months down the line are completely different. I don't know whether you would agree with that, David.
Yeah, I would. What I was going to say, though, is that I think find business support is great, but it could be simpler still. There's still work to be done. But, we are delighted to push Business Gateway as a one-stop shop, because that's what it was set up to be, or that's what it's been agreed to be. But that presupposes that Business Gateway has got itself into a position where it can be the one-stop shop, that staff right across Scotland understand this, they can answer customers' questions. And one thing I was going to say is that we haven't done it for a few years now, so it's slightly out of date. But it surprised me then, and it still surprised me with the queries we get, how many businesses haven't heard of any of the support organizations. They haven't heard of Business Gateway, they haven't heard of, now, it's not through lack of promotion, I don't think, because there's a lot of promotion out there, but still so many small and micro businesses haven't heard of that there is support there for them. And it's how we get that message across. And that's why I think promoting one organization as the sort of front piece, the front organization that can then source, whether it be interface, all these other organizations can help people down that route is a sensible way forward.
Yes, yes, Jackie.
I was just going to say, in rural areas, I think word of mouth is really important, because as we all know, we can have websites and ads in local organisations, all sorts of promotional things going on. But if you meet somebody and they say, this is where we went, and probably about 60% of our referrals are word of mouth, people that know somebody who have suggested that they come and do that. So I think it's really important to help people to promote people in that way. I think particularly in rural communities where people tend to listen to what other folk in the community are doing and the value that they've got. We also realised last year that there was this huge focus on buying local, and people really wanting to support their local businesses, and that was almost leading to more people wanting to set up local businesses. One of the things we set up was our REDS directory, which aims to be a directory where any small rural business can be listed, and it's got a map so you can look, and one, it gives you sort of confidence that there's lots of other people running businesses in rural areas, but it also gives you a sense of the sectors. And it also leads people to the support, so they can go on to other links using reds.scot. So I think there's lots of mechanisms to help people to find the right support.
Francesca, I'm just thinking about how you get business. Is it word of mouth, or is it more digital?
I think that it's very digital, and I think that it's mostly through social media, so it's kind of coupled with word of mouth. So people leave a good review, they leave pictures on posts, and next second you have people commenting, where is this? And then you can swoop in, because you have a presence online, to give them exactly the link to book it, and also information to how to get to us. And I think on a Sunday, after people have done their treks on a Saturday and Sunday, that's when we get most of the bookings in. I think for us digitally, it's very easy for us and it's very cost effective as well. Most of our ads are run through Google My Business or through Facebook, and that on the whole gets quite a lot, well, the majority of our custom. And also the location, especially during lockdown, people are out walking past the alpacas saying why are they here, why have they arrived, and then people, obviously it gets the discussion going. I think it's quite important to say that, you know, for me and my husband, using the internet is second nature to us because we've kind of grown up with it. But I think it is a bit of a learning curve for people who are slightly older. And I think also it's really important to establish some kind of online community and have some kind of presence online where people are following your progress. And I think also community-wise, there's lots of social media groups that give you advice as well. So there's different groups in relation to alpacas, small businesses. You can put up discussions of problems and also advice on where to go. And actually, I've seen, especially in the smallholders, I think it's Scottish Smallholders Facebook group, there seems to be a lot of where can I go for business advice? And then people are saying Business Gateway. And so again, it's through word of mouth, but online, because you might not actually come across these people. They might live an hour away from you and you might never have met them, but then you meet them online through this kind of community forum, and it brings, you know, communities together. And you might actually eventually meet them because, you know, you've met online kind of thing. So it is quite important to get your head around how to use it.
That's an interesting observation. Your content on your Facebook and your website is fantastic, and obviously the alpacas are very photogenic. So I don't know, I don't want this to be flippant, but maybe you don't have to try too hard, or maybe you do and you've just set it up that it looks so easy. So I think in terms of digital and your, you know, proposition and in terms of your visibility, is brilliant. I was just thinking about the chickens again, though. I'm not sure if they would have just been as photogenic. So it looks like you've made the right decision. Someone,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, also, I wanted to say, yeah, also just to reiterate the website, we set that again up through advice through a webinar, which was Google My Business, which is all free. So we really had advice on how to set that up and make it look, you know, visually good. And again, that was through Business Gateway Advisor putting us in touch with that. Great.
We've only got a few minutes left, so a couple of things that have cropped up. Jackie, someone is asking for the map. So if you've got a link to that, that was something that you had mentioned. Is that possible?
Okay. Yes, it's very simple actually. It's a website, reds.scot. So if you go on that, and that gives you information how you can join. It's really simple and free to join that.
We're told we're going to send it around afterwards as well. A number of folk have asked about that. And we have so many directories now, we need to streamline matters. This is more on the confusing landscape for business support. I think we probably all agree that, you know, apart from Find Business Support, which we know still has to be fine-tuned, but it's a start, that we probably have to try a bit harder, no matter what our organisation is, to be able to provide the support to businesses at the front end. Well, we're coming to the end of the webinar. I hope that it's been informative for everyone today. And I hope we've managed to get through all of the questions. Well, we've certainly got through most of the questions on the chat this morning. And I think we'll probably all go away and think a bit more, mainly about staffing, probably about digital and creativity in rural areas, and certainly the wider issue, and not just for rural areas, but the multitude of organisations that are out there. So it's probably just enough time for me to say thank you everyone for joining us today on this Business Gateway webinar, and I hope it has been informative and useful in terms of the support access that is available for your business going forward. And as always, thanks to our guest, David Richardson from the Federation of Small Businesses, the manager for the Highlands and Islands, Jackie Brereton, who's the CEO of GrowBiz, and Francesca Wade from West Coast Alpacas. Good luck to all of you, and no doubt we'll meet up again at some point. The webinar has been recorded and will be on the bgateway.com website. Until next time, it's bye for now.